Do you like wrestling trivia? Then check out the 5-Star Match Game, the Pro Wrestling Quiz Show. I'm Joe Gagney, and every episode, I grill 3 contestants with 5 rounds of power-packed wrestling trivia. We have over 30 evergreen episodes in the archives covering WWE, AEW, Japan, Mexico, and much, 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 much more. Play along at home and check it out today.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings. And joining us once again, he's returning to the show. He is our Cork City correspondent out in Ireland. It's Garrett Kidney. Garrett, how are you?
What was this? 3 times now, I think? 3?
Yeah, you're gonna get your little You guys don't have Dunkin' Donuts, do you?
We have one of them. I think we have Krispy Kreme. I don't think we have Dunkin'.
Oh, well, the 3-time guests get a Dunkin' Donuts gift card, but I don't know how much good it will do you.
Do you have rankings? Who's been on most?
People ask this. Well, my co-host Jason Umpresser, who hosted the first 30 episodes of the show with me, would technically be on the most. Joe Lanza likes to think he's on the most. It's close. Adam Berger has been on here a lot. Warren Hayes has been on a lot, but 3-time guest is pretty good. I would say there's probably only a handful of people that could join that club.
That's good. I had the same question with Andrew Rich and Music of the Match because I was on that 6 times, and I was like, "Where am I? Where am I in the rankings?" That's all that matters. I'm just running up the score.
Yeah, you're trying to be like Alec Baldwin and Saturday Night Live, and just be on the most hosted episodes. I have never been on Music of the Mat, although I believe I probably have an open invitation to go on it. But anyway, the reason you're on the show 3 times is because of your incredible knowledge of a obscure wrestling promotion called Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. There's no one better to talk about certain subjects than yourself, and that is our subject today, which is AJ Styles. And I've done these episodes in the past. You came on and we talked about Samoa Joe last year. I talked about John Cena with Joe Lanza a couple months ago, and those episodes always kind of were done in a certain time frame. When we talk about Samoa Joe, he was AEW world champion. He was kind of having this renaissance period in his career, so it made sense to kind of talk about him. When I talked about John Cena with Joe Lanza, it was right before his final year was going to start, right before 2025. So there was kind of a reason for that. There really isn't a direct reason I wanted to talk about AJ Styles. There's nothing really super important happening in his career as we record this. But I do think he's someone who I think we're looking at right now is that he's in the twilight of his career, if that's fair to say. And he's one of, I think, the most important wrestlers of the 21st century. And I guess I'll start with this. What do you think about AJ Styles when I say AJ Styles, what do you think?
My brain always goes back to 2005 short hair X Division AJ.
Mm-hmm.
In my head,
The short tights.
Yeah, the short tights, the multicolored bikers. That in my head, my brain goes to the Hard Justice 2005 AJ Styles. For some reason, it's always those green and black bikers he had, where he won the NWA title from Jeff Jarrett. If you say AJ Styles, that is the image I have in my mind. Which is funny because he's been in WWE now for going on a decade in January. That's probably not the vision of AJ Styles for most people anymore. Most people have long hair, at the very least Bullet Club AJ. Never mind short hair, old school TNA AJ. So that the second you mention AJ though, I go right back into my little nostalgia window of early TNA, ace of TNA, ace of the X Division.
Really good point, because that's what I think of as well. I think exactly of that version of AJ Styles. I think about, I'm not sure exactly which match it was, but it is the Ultimate X match where he basically takes the ridiculous bump where he does a full front flip off of the wire and just lands right on his back. That version of AJ Styles, which again, like you said, but that's now 20 years ago. And you're right about his career in WWE and at least in Bullet Club. That is I still think we're right that that's like the proper version of AJ Styles, but certainly with younger fans now, or fans that weren't watching TNA or New Japan at the time, they're thinking of, WWE AJ Styles, who's like you said, has now been in the company for 10 years, which is crazy.
Yeah, because I was thinking about this the other week because I was thinking about like who has had the longest consecutive run in TNA because Eddie Edwards is on like 11 years now, which is pretty much up there. And I was thinking like Eddie Edwards has been in TNA for as long as AJ Styles has been out of TNA. It was basically 2 weeks after AJ left, Eddie arrived. So thinking about that, like, oh God, that's 11 years. 11 years he's been out of TNA, you know? That's ancient history to wrestling fans now, especially like this modern era of wrestling fans where we've had like a generational shift, I think, post COVID, where there's like a whole new generation of fans who know very, very little about wrestling pre COVID. So, like, the
Mhm.
idea of that AJ, it being literally ancient history. Like, when you think of like 2005 to 1985, that's the kind of
Yeah.
thing we're thinking. We're thinking like WrestleMania 1 from when we're thinking about the AJ that we're talking about, you know? That's the time scale here. And yeah, those fans have no idea what happened in that era. Like, fans don't know that. Even like the curious ones, I don't think have any clue about. Like, they know the idea of AJ Styles and TNA, but they have no idea the reality. They don't know. They've not watched any matches. They maybe have watched the Unbreakable Three Way. That's tops. The
Well,
most they
yeah,
watch.
when I think about like, okay, 2005 to 1985, like you said WrestleMania 1, you think of like Roddy Piper and Hulkamania and stuff like that. But like AJ Styles and TNA would be the equivalent of like some like minor territory
Hmm.
star in 1985. Like maybe like Rick Martel's AWA run would be like a closer equivalent uh than like Hulkamania or anything like that. But it is, I mean, I'd kind of be fascinated to have someone on the show who's like a 20-year-old wrestling fan who like just started watching wrestling in like the last few years and just be like, have you seen a Shawn Michaels match before? And just see what they say. Because I do think that's like could be really fascinating to discuss. What
Yeah,
we take
because
for
like
granted, what people have seen, I guess.
the way you hear people talk about Triple H's wrestling career now is so different to the people that actually experienced it in real time. You know, the way that narrative has shifted through, frankly, actual literal propaganda, but the way that narrative has shifted over time, you see that like people have grown up watching WWE documentaries where they were told certain things. They have never investigated those things for themselves and they just regurgitate it. So yeah, it would be interesting to be like, what do you think of Triple H as a wrestler? And most people, I think, the average WWE fan these days would be like, oh, he's a legend. And then you would
Yeah,
ask
but
the follow up
I would
question
say
like,
that,
name their favorite five matches, and they're like,
yeah.
oh no, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Levesque, in particular, I think there are plenty of people that were watching in the 2000s that think Triple H is still awesome. Like
Mm.
it wasn't like he was universally hated. He was certainly a. What's changed with him is his reputation among like the hardcore wrestling fans is totally shifted from where it was in like 2002 or 2003,
But
where
it's because you think about both those reigns at the same time in both companies. We had dual reigns of terror between Jarrett and Triple H, and now in 2025, both have been like kind of like whitewashed is the wrong way to put it because it's not that dramatic. But like both people are like, oh
I don't know.
no,
Were
it
you
wasn't that
watching
bad.
Raw in 2002? I don't know. That doesn't seem too dramatic for me.
Yeah, like people are like, oh no, no, they're good. I can't believe anybody ever thought Jeff Jarrett was bad. It's like he was. You didn't watch it.
Yeah.
He was bad.
Yeah, Jarrett's an interesting one because especially now because he really has um he's outlasted pretty much all of his peers by a significant margin, and he is like probably the last real like territory style worker that we have in wrestling. So when he does things like he throws those Memphis punches and he knows he's done some angles, especially since he's come to AEW, where it's like this guy understands old school wrestling in a way that just you can't really replicate. Only somebody from that time period can do. So he's kind of hung on as like this cool like curiosity from the past, as opposed to being like a attention hogging limelight star, which is where he would have been at the founding of TNA.
I do kind of like how he has actually gone through like that. He's kind of gone through the full arc of redemption, and now people are sick of him again. It's like maybe like the MJF feud maybe isn't the best indicator of it, but like that stuff at the start of this year, people are like, ah, wait a minute now, we like Jeff, but not that much. Let's hit the brakes on the amount of Jeff Jarrett on the show.
Yeah, there's a low Jeff Jarrett cap. But speaking of times where Jeff Jarrett was all over the product, AJ Styles, when I think of him, when I was thinking about this podcast, there's two things I thought of first were something that I don't think AJ Styles gets enough credit for is how good he was at a very early stage of his career. When TNA first started, he was only a few years into his career. He made his debut in 1999. He had, I don't know, had he wrestled 100 matches in his career by the time he debuted on TNA? I'm not sure. I'm sure if you looked at Cage Match, it might say that. Um, but he was so early into his career. And I think really right from the get go, he was one of the handful of most exciting wrestlers on television, really from a very early period in his career. I think he gets better as a wrestler throughout the 2000s and even into the 2010s as terms of like an overall complete performer. But when we talk about talent that was like really good right from the get go, and people will talk about, Kurt Angle or Jumbo Zeruda, I think AJ deserves to at least come up in the conversations because I have never seen a period of AJ Styles' career where he wasn't an extremely exciting wrestler.
Yeah, you even go back and watch like the handful of WCW matches he had alongside Air Paris, the couple
Mhm.
during the cruiserweight titles, the two cruiserweight tag title stuff they were doing right at the death when AJ had a cup of coffee in WCW, and you can see like, oh, if WCW survived, that man was going to be the face of that company too. Like you can even see like the hint of that then, that like AJ would have been like a top, well, maybe not. They would have like done everything in their power to not put the world title on him, knowing WCW, but
Well,
yeah, but
if only we had some examples of the people that were running WCW at the time running AJ Styles' career. If only that happened, we would get a better understanding of what could have happened.
he would have been Mini Nate then too,
Yeah,
back in 2001.
100% would have been.
But yeah, when you watch 2002 AJ, you're right that like you watch like the first X Division match, the 6-man tag, or you watch the first X Division title match with Loki, Psychosis, and Jerry Lynn, and you do see like that this guy is explosive. He bursts off the screen. TNA knew it too because like he won the X Division title in his second match. Like they knew what they had with that guy. He was one of the very first guys they signed to a contract in like March 2002. So like they knew full well this guy has a ton of potential. This guy is like of the people they signed, like, and they had Loki, they had like Chris Harris, they had James Storm, of all those like younger guys they signed in those early days, even pre like Sabin and Shelley and Joe and like Daniels coming in, people like that. They knew AJ was that guy. They knew from the very start, and he was. And it's kind of like the small joy of watching those early years of TNA because he's not the finished article. You know, he is still like raw and athletic, and there's stuff he does that kind of sucks that he has to work out of his game and get better. And when you see him work, particularly with Jerry Lynn, who I don't think gets enough credit, Daniels gets a lot of credit and well deserved for kind of helping to mold AJ Styles into the AJ Styles we know and love. Like I think invaluable were those matches with Jerry Lynn in 2002 for him in terms of working with like a real seasoned pro who works that style of wrestling, who can keep up with AJ, but who also has like a mountain of experience working everywhere in the world to help AJ through without, being the wrong kind of veteran who's like, oh, AJ, you can't be doing that cool stuff, but rather here's how you do the cool stuff and where you do the cool stuff. I don't think Jerry gets enough credit for those early days of helping really take that raw material, that really exciting raw material that was 2002 AJ Styles, and by 2005 help mold that into arguably the best wrestler in the world at that point.
So he wrestles in the first TNA match ever, correct?
Yes, Flying Elvis is against Jerry Lynn, Loki, and AJ Styles.
Can you tell me who were the Flying Elvises? Do you know that off the top of your head?
That is Jimmy Yang, Sonny Siaki, and Jorge Estrada.
Of course. And I don't think they were long for TNA. But that was the first match ever in TNA history. TNA total nonstop action, NWA, total nonstop action #1. And they lose. The Flying Elvises get the win there, but
It
it
makes so much
was
sense. Don't think about the fact that the X Division title match the next week features the three men who lose, not the Elvises. Don't think too much about that. But yeah,
right. And especially if you look at that first ever TNA show, that first match is clearly the highlight of the show, and that would originally kind of become the tone for TNA, which had a lot of bad stuff. It was just trying to figure out what it was going to be. Is it going to be WCW 2.0? Is it going to be like a southern wrestling territory? Are they gonna are they gonna rely on names from TV, I guess, from WCW or WWE? But pretty early on, like when you talk to any actual fans of TNA, the takeaway of the promotion, what is TNA? It's like it's a promotion with the X Division. It's the promotion with AJ Styles, and you said like Jerry Lynn, Low Key, Amazing Red, Christopher Daniels, all these guys who were kind of doing an extremely exciting style of wrestling that we weren't getting at the time from WWE. I know people will point to that's the same era as like the SmackDown 6. And yeah, you had Rey Mysterio and you had Kurt Angle and you had Edge and Benoit. And you did have good wrestlers, but you also had the Triple H Reign of Terror. And you also had this, what felt like a ceiling for certain smaller wrestlers that didn't exist in TNA. And really, that is the identity of the promotion for at least like the first like 7 years of its existence.
Yeah, even when you look at that SmackDown 6 era, like who were the guys on top? It was Brock, it was Big Show, it was Undertaker.
Yeah, Triple
For as
H.
much
Yeah.
as those guys had awesome matches, even like just isolating it to SmackDown, even like under Heyman's booking, you still had those awesome undercard matches, and like Kurt and Benoit would break into main events every now and again, but it was still Brock and Undertaker and Big Show for the most part,
Mhm.
hogging up the main events of that
It was
period.
Vince McMahon's pro wrestling,
Yeah,
very
for
much
sure.
so.
So like the X Division, like the thing, it I think its historical import is taking that style of wrestling and taking it toward the main events in a way WCW never did. Because you can say arguably like it is an extension of the WCW Cruiserweight division, stylistically in terms of what they're going for. But the difference the X Division made, and the difference AJ frankly made because he was probably the one B star to Jarrett's forced 1A, was AJ was like so much of an undeniable star that he took that division and made it a main event division and made it very, very quickly because it did main event the second pay per view. That X
Mhm.
Division title match main evented the second pay per view. As you said, it opened the first pay per view because technically it didn't because there was a Legends parade thing that was meant to go on after the X Division match, but Cheeks broke the ring, so they had to spend some time fixing the ring. So the X Division match got moved to the second segment of the show. It was the first match. But it is a pet peeve I have where people are like, oh well, TNA didn't know what they had with AJ Styles. It's like fuck they didn't. Main evented the first match, main evented second show, won the X title, was the first tag champs, and won the world title within his first year in the company. That company knew what they had with AJ. Did they use him well all the time? No. But they sure as hell they knew what that guy was, and they knew that he was from pretty much day one the face of the company. Whether Jarrett wanted it or not, he was the face of the company.
Yeah, if you go back to like let's just say like the Asylum years, like the first few years of TNA, um, like what percentage of matches from that era of TNA that are watched today, 2025, what percent of the matches are like X Division matches versus like the rest of the card? Because I don't think anyone is really, unless you're a real sicko or you're running a TNA history podcast, is going back and watching like the main events of in the world title picture or these random mid card matches. Like everything from that feels like TNA's relevancy from that period today is the X Division and basically whoever AJ Styles was wrestling that week.
Yeah, and like maybe some AMW tag stuff.
Yeah,
And
that was I was gonna when I was looking at some cards, I was like, all right, like what, like if you pick out a random TNA card, like which of these matches sound good? Like this is this like can I read this? I'm gonna read the second ever TNA pay-per-view card ever. And you tell me which
mhm.
one of these matches sounds exciting to you. So the opening match, Scott Hall beats Jeff Jarrett. Jackie Fargo and Toby Keith were in the corner for Scott Hall, of course. The aforementioned Cheeks defeats someone named Frank Parker. I don't know who that is. Um, do you know who the Cheeks valet was?
Oh god, I can't think of it off the top of my head. Who
Well,
valeted Cheeks?
her name was the Brown Eyed Girl.
Oh great.
Do you get it?
Yeah.
Then we had Brian Christopher with Hermie Sadler and Sterling Marlin, NASCAR drivers, of course. He defeats K Crush, who, of course, is our truth. That match sound exciting for you?
It's a classic. It has Hermie Sadler involved. I love Hermie. It's building to Hermie Sadler against Ron Killings. What more do you want in life?
Does it have Sterling Marlin's giant head? That man had a giant head. He had to get us. I'm pretty sure he had to get a custom NASCAR helmet just for his head. That guy's squash was enormous for his body. Then we had a Miss TNA lingerie battle royal. We got Taylor Vaughn defeating Alexis Laree, Electra, Erin, Francine, Joni. Women were not allowed to have last names, apparently. Miss Sasha, Shannon, and Tyler. I couldn't tell you who like any of those people are. Obviously, Alexis Laree is Mickey James, and Francine is Francine. Um.
Shannon is Daphne.
Oh, okay, okay, that helps.
But that match is only notable for like Mickey James being in it, really.
Yeah. Then we have Gran Apollo defeats David Young. I'm not sure who either of these people are. Well, Gran Apollo it looks like he's a Puerto Rican wrestler. That match
Yeah.
has a 2.11 on Cage Match, in case you're wondering. Then, of course, it's America's Most Wanted defeat the Rainbow Express with Joel Gertner. I don't know what I forget what the Rainbow Express is, but I'm gonna guess it's really offensive.
Yes, it is.
And then, okay, so that's the rest of the card. That match was only 4 minutes long, so like even like the America's Most Wanted match probably isn't that good because they're facing an offensive tag team.
And
Uh,
they're doing tag partners that don't get along at first before
oh
they
yeah, of
find
course.
their. So it's a boring shtick as well for a little while.
And then the main event: AJ Styles defeats Jerry Lynn, Low Key, and Psychosis in a 4-way elimination match, a double elimination match. So out of that card, like, what do you think people are gonna watch?
I love my Cheeks versus Frank Parker match personally. I watch it twice a year. It's my comfort. I saw the thread going around on Twitter today. What's your comfort wrestling match? Mine is actually Cheeks versus Frank Parker.
Who is Frank Parker?
I think he was
Let's
just a
see.
job guy.
Frank the Tank. Yeah, looks like he didn't. Yeah, I'm trying to look at what his career was. Yeah, it looks like he just did a lot of like indie stuff in the '90s. Anyway, uh, but yeah, like, just and I not to this isn't like a burial of TNA, but just to kind of hammer home like what AJ Styles meant to that company, and historically as we look back on like what the early years of TNA, what is relevant, what is exciting, what is something you're going to go back and watch and be like, damn, that was good, and it's almost always like whoever AJ Styles was wrestling that week.
Like there is an honest question of like, if TNA didn't have AJ Styles, would they have survived? And
Hmm.
like the answer is not like a firm yes. You know, the answer is there is a little bit of a maybe. If they didn't have AJ, they might have went out of business because like AJ was the USP. You know, for all the stuff they tried and threw at the wall, they're like, well, AJ's still there. Whereas, like, if AJ wasn't there, they still have good wrestlers. They still have like Chris Sabin or you know Amazing Red or AMW. But AJ is like the one where you're like, oh, they have a thing that might be the best thing in wrestling. That's like the only thing they had that might be the best thing in wrestling. And without that, I don't know. Maybe fans look at it differently. Maybe Panda Energy look at it differently. Maybe the Carter family look at it a little differently. So I really do think like he was fundamental to the success of that company. Whatever success that company did have, and whatever you want to argue about it, AJ was like I think the cornerstone, more so than Jarrett, more so than anybody else.
It's a great point, especially because I feel like, I mean, he's already in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame, so we don't need to make a case for him again. But his TNA years are never really used as like, oh, he was a draw during that time period. Especially in those early years because the company obviously really struggled. But it's a great point about like how foundational was he to the company's survival. He is like a great he'd be like a great prospect on a team that was otherwise struggling, or like TNA is the soccer team who is going to go into administration, but they have a great young player that they can sell for a lot of money. And that's basically what AJ Styles was. Now they were able to retain him. They didn't sell him like, Birmingham City did with Jude Bellingham, but they were um he was like this asset that you're like, well, if we have that guy and we have him, and we have a couple other decent guys, but we have that guy, we do have something going forward. It's hard to
And the
tell because of how disorganized TNA was, especially during that first year or two, and kind of they were still trying to figure out what they were. But in hindsight, it's a great point.
like the company was never the same without him. Like he left at the start of
Yeah.
2014. Fair enough. Sting left 2 weeks later. That also didn't help. Like the 1-2 punch of losing Sting and AJ within 2 weeks of each other was like the TNA was never the same. Like never ever the same after that.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at the third pay-per-view, and it's like even
Big
way
AJ
worse.
Styles David Young match.
It's
You're really
e-
hyped for
it
that one?
it's even worse than the second one. I have never watched these. Like, have you gone back and watched all of these?
Yeah, there's a whole
Yeah,
podcast where we reviewed them. It's
yeah. But you go
they're,
one by one on. You've got to be kidding me.
we go month by month, so we cover those
Yeah.
shows 4 at a time.
Oh gosh, no wonder you guys took a hiatus. Uh,
uh, but
uh
yeah, those shows they're rough, man. They're rough. They're
I mean, the
weird,
matches aren't that
wacky.
long, but
Like they're full Rins Russo television. It's like it's crazy, and some of it's
yeah,
good, some of it's terrible, some of
yeah.
it's funny, a lot of it's terrible.
I'm not
But
gonna. Yeah, not to kill more time, but I don't want to lead the listeners on. I'm gonna read this card real quick. For this is the third one. I swear this is the last one I'm gonna read. We start America's Most Wanted defeat the Johnsons, who, if you guys remember, were famously like penises. That was their gimmick. They're wrestling penises, correct?
they were men in penis costumes, yes, managed by
Yes.
Mortimer Plumtree.
Yes. So America's Most Wanted, again, saddled with an offensive tag team that they're wrestling. Um, they win in 4 minutes. Then we got Monty Brown defeats a man named Anthony Ingram in a 1 minute squash match. Then we have the aforementioned Rainbow Express, the second offensive tag team to be on the show. They defeat Buff Bagwell and Grand Apollo. Then we've got a hardcore midget match. Puppet defeats Todd Stone. That match goes a minute. Then we've got a Francine defeats Taylor Vaughn by DQ. Then we got the NWA World Heavyweight title. It's Ken Shamrock. He defeats Malice, who people might better remember as The Wall from WCW.
That's the Wall brother.
Yep, that's The Wall, brother. That's the title match that happens in the mid card. Then we have AJ Styles versus David Young, which has a 6.7 on cage match. It is easily the best match on this show. Then AJ Styles has a tag team title match. Him and Jerry Lynn win the NWA World Tag Team titles from the Rainbow Express, and the title was vacant, but that was like the end of the final tournament. And then the main event is Jeff Jarrett and K Crush, R-Truth, defeat Brian Christopher and Scott Hall. So again, to give you an idea, like I don't know, like 8 of the worst matches you could possibly imagine, and then 2 AJ Styles matches. And that was that third pay-per-view of TNA. I mean, this guy, because you're right. Like in my mind, I think of like, oh, it's AJ Styles, but it's also Christopher Daniels, it's Amazing Red, it's Chris Sabin, it's these other guys. But really, AJ is clearly positioned at a level ahead of those guys in terms of his importance, and he's on basically all of these shows.
Yeah, and like the X Division, you can see the various phases of the X Division where like Styles, Loki, Lynn was a main event feud for TNA in 2002. When all those guys left the X Division slipped back down to being a mid card division until 2005, or well, late mid 2004, when AJ came back to the X Division, elevated it back to being a main event division. Left again to team with Daniels in 2006. X Division slips back down into being a mid card division. Like there is a direct correlation between how seriously the X Division is taken and whether or not AJ Styles was in it.
Yeah, and I think something else I wanted to say about AJ was he doesn't. Where would you say like he is one of the most influential wrestlers of this millennium? I think he really, as a wrestler, I think he really took like a lot of the stuff that like Eddie Guerrero was doing in the 1990s and then wrestled that style, but in a more athletic way and really pushed the boundaries even further. And that style of wrestling has almost become the default style of wrestling across the entire wrestling world in terms of like who the elite workers are. There are obviously guys that work different styles. There's people like Zack Sabre Jr. That wrestle a very different style, obviously. But that AJ Styles, high flying, but with power moves. And obviously he didn't like invent it necessarily, but he was basically the only guy. He was the preeminent practitioner of that style on television for 10 years. And I think that really, you can see his influence basically with every wrestler now.
Yeah, I like to think of wrestling as like family trees. And
Mhm.
you're like there's a branch that AJ is not the originator of. He is like partway down the branch. But you look at like who is the most influential wrestler in 2025. It is very obviously Will Ospreay. You watch anybody wrestle
Mhm.
on the indies, and you will see them trying to do some version of what Will Ospreay is doing. Then you ask yourself the question: who is Will Ospreay influenced by? Well, it's AJ Styles, very obviously. Will Ospreay has said that he does the Styles Clash, he does the Flying Forearm Smash. He has said straight out the match that made him become a wrestler was the Unbreakable Three Way. Like AJ, so like you track those like layers of influence, and you can see. So if Will was influenced by AJ, and every wrestler in the world right now is influenced by Will, that does mean by extension every wrestler in the world right now is influenced by AJ Styles. You know, when you watch everybody try to do that Will Ospreay match, it is ultimately because of AJ Styles. When you track that like wrestling tree forward, so like as you said, him kind of mainstreaming that cruiserweight style, which as again it did happen in the 90s with the WCW cruiserweights as well, but you know the WWE the WWE like house style in 2005 was nothing like that. You know, it was plotting main events, it was like big finishers and big like gestures and all that stuff. And you see like the WWE house style now is so much closer to what AJ Styles was in 2005 than the WCW cruiserweights, you know? So you see how like the PWG kind of era has won. Like that's
Mhm.
what everybody's doing now. You watch a WWE Performance Center trainee woman do a like backflip into a cut or whatever, and fans will lose their minds now. That's what they want out of wrestling. They don't want like grab a hold and tell a story.
Well, I mean, you could argue that the WCW cruiserweight style wouldn't have been nearly as influential if like it would have been dead if it wasn't for people like AJ Styles in the TNA X division.
Mm. Because
Because
it is like it is different from what Ring of Honor were doing, which I think is an important distinction. Like because Ring of Honor is more like an offshoot of Japan and Puro than it is of like 90s cruiserweight stuff. So like TNA is like the extension of that WCW cruiserweight stuff a lot more than Ring of Honor ever even tried to be. I'm not saying like they failed to be. They weren't doing that. That wasn't what they were going for. So I think you are right that at least in America, obviously the WCW cruiserweight stuff came from like
Yeah,
Mexico,
and
but
I mean, like you still had like Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero, and those wrestlers were in WWE, and they were wrestling kind of that style still. And they obviously had the cruiserweight division, which at different times was pushed moderately, and other times completely forgotten. But I do think, like in terms of like actually making that style relevant and getting up and coming wrestlers or kids excited about being professional wrestlers doing that style, like you used Will Ospreay is probably the best example of that. Um, it is definitely because of TNA. I feel like that style kind of lived on and remained as influential. I mean, you mentioned like Will Ospreay in the US in like US Indies. You watch guys starting out and they're doing like they're doing Will Ospreay stuff, but they're also kind of doing AJ style stuff. I even think about people like Ozawa in Noah, who's like the new guy Noah is pushing, and like his wrestling style and how similar that is to AJ Styles, or like Yuki Ueno in DDT. Like even in Japan, in like obviously those companies have their own stars who influence them, but I still even see AJ Styles in those guys. So it's really a global, universal wrestling thing, in addition to being obviously hugely influential through American television.
you just want, if you think about aesthetics, AJ's like look from say 2014 onwards, from his like Lone Wolf TNA stuff, so many people have ripped that off. Like as many people have ripped that off as ripped off like Alex Shelley from 5 or 10 years earlier, you know. So like even if you think like visual presentation, AJ has also like led that game far and ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I like you said, we talked about like what do we think of when we think of AJ Styles? Like I picture, I agree. Like it's earrings, 2005, AJ Styles. I want a hypothetical. How do you think his career develops if he doesn't go to TNA?
I think there is actually like a direct correlation in that I think maybe not quite as talented, but Paul London is right up there in terms of level of talent, like relative to AJ Styles. I think if you looked at both of them in like 2003, you would like, be like, both of these guys should be some of the biggest stars in the world. One of them went to WWE, one of them didn't. Paul London's career is a pretty large what if. He had a really good tag team run with Brian Kendrick, but he never developed into that like top level star that you would really have hoped from him when you watched him in 2003. AJ Styles did, because he didn't go to WWE. And I think that's the real difference. I really do think he would have ended up as like a nice mid-card cruiserweight guy at best, who doesn't quite hit the potential that he should, doesn't get the opportunities to develop that he should. Because like an underrated thing is like he starts working with Christian, he starts working with Sting, he starts working with Kurt Angle. All of these people help him fill in any gaps, the very few remaining gaps, and even character gaps. Because like you watch an AJ Styles promo from 2005, they are diabolical. He's terrible. He's really, really bad. But though that year with Christian, where like you can argue he should not have been playing like a lower lackey to Christian, and you would be correct. But that is the year where he developed his personality and actually developed like an ability to develop a character. So like all of that in TNA really helped him develop into like one of the best wrestlers of all time. And I really think if he went to WWE, he would have been on a mid card and SmackDown where he gets like a Griffin, our VOW pal, would be putting together a great velocity pack of great AJ Styles matches against like Tajiri and Jamie
Hey,
Noble,
he
and that's
has
all we
that.
get.
He has that velocity match against the Hurricane.
Yeah, he does have the one. Like that's who he would have been. He would have been like Jamie Noble. He would have been like Paul London, guys who had tons of talent but never became the thing they should have been. And AJ, by avoiding WWE expressly at that time period in WWE history, where the kind of wrestler he is would have gotten no shot, absolutely none.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think like as up and down as his time in TNA was and how they pushed him and their investment in him kind of varied throughout the years during his time there. You're 100% right in that it gave him an opportunity to really genuinely develop as a professional wrestler in a weekly television format, in a US television format where you're cutting promos and things like that. And it wasn't always perfect, but he got the kind of reps in that you would need to in order to maximize your potential. Then even if you were working for like a Ring of Honor, where sure you get a lot of ring time, but would you develop that personality? We saw plenty of guys develop personality and stuff working the U.S. Indies, so it's not possible. But it is probably a major question mark. And as opposed to if he just went right to WWE, it seems really likely that he would have ended up like those guys you said, even if he was really talented. Like I think he's a lot more talented than Paul London. I think he's a lot more talented than Jamie Noble, but he's about the same size as them, which is probably the most important thing in terms of your chances of getting a push, especially in that era of WWE.
Yeah, I think like it's a thing we really miss. I think those dual pillars of Ring of Honor and TNA in the early to mid 2000s really helped develop both sides of a lot of wrestlers. Like when you see like an Austin Aries or a Samoa Joe or an AJ Styles, you see how Ring of Honor sharpened their in-ring and TNA sharpened their like TV instincts and character stuff to form complete wrestlers. Like those two companies I think were invaluable as like a developmental tool in tandem with each other with very different philosophical outlooks, but in ways that forced like performers to actually develop a varied skill set as opposed to just being like a Ring of Honor work rate guy or just like a TNA TV wrestler.
Yeah, I mean it's what the purpose of those smaller promotions can serve in terms of giving earnest attempts at pushing different talent and giving them opportunities where they might not always succeed, but the ones who are really talented will at least get an opportunity to sharpen their skills. And that's probably lacking today. I think the landscape today is much different, obviously. Um, you still have TNA, you still technically have Ring of Honor, and you also have like a promotion like MLW, which is kind of like or NWA, who at least are running shows and taping television. Um, so you do have that, but it is a little bit different today, and you could point to maybe that is hurting overall talent development.
Yeah, talent development is the slowest it's ever been. Like people coming through the indies, like people are like the indies are dead, and they're not. There's talent there, but the opportunities to work, and I think a very important thing is like the depth of skill of the people you're working with. Like it helped a lot that like a Samoa Joe or a Bryan Danielson would go to Japan, work with some of the most experienced guys in the world, and come back to America and then work with Shelley and work with Aries and work with
Uh-huh.
Strong, and then you get the iron sharpening iron thing, which is the reason like Titus Alexander, someone like that, going over to Japan working Noah is like I think invaluable for U.S. Indies, so that he comes back and helps everyone get better using that experience. Like it's slower, it's not dead, but it's so much slower than the process you would have had in
Yeah.
the 2000s.
Yeah, slow is a great way to describe it because, like we were just talking about, like AJ Styles is like 2.5 years, 3 years into his career, and he's like already really exciting and really good. And he's wrestling on television. I guess he's wrestling on pay per view technically, but he's already like. And we just talked about like he's really good. Like even now, even if there is talent coming out of the Indies, it just seems like it takes a really long time for that talent. Like you mentioned Titus Alexander, like Titus Alexander has been a wrestler for like I don't know, like 9 years. Like it's there's just not a lot of speed um in talent development the way there used to be. I guess you could say like WWE has like the performance center and they'll throw out wrestlers with only a couple years experience, but even then they're really pigeonholed into a hierarchy that's very difficult to crack, especially on the men's side. Like the men on in WWE. And you could say a similar case for AEW as well, although I think there are a few exceptions. But if you look at like who are the top male stars in WWE, the amount of in-ring experience that those guys have is like crazy as a standard.
Yeah, they're
Like
all in
is
their 40s, which is
yeah, like
a problem in itself. But
like is Roman Reigns their like newest like legitimate top guy that they have in terms of like when they started their wrestling career?
yes, because like who are the top guys? Cody, who's been wrestling since 2005 or whatever.
Yeah, Kevin Owens, Sami
Rollins,
Zayn,
yeah. Like when you look at
Rollins,
when Kevin Owens got
Cena,
signed, like Kevin
Drew
Owens was signed
McIntyre.
in 2015, you know?
Yeah,
The
well, that's the
Well,
situations that were
2014,
happening.
whatever it was.
Yeah,
But like, yeah, Kevin Owens was like, as you said, like you might say something about Titus Alexander, like 9 years in, but like Owens was fair enough. He was a lot better earlier than a lot of guys you see on the Indies now. But like, he was on the Indies for the bones of 15 years before he made it to WWE.
yeah, that was like Broderick Strong. Like Broderick Strong was like a great wrestler for like 12 years before he got like a real shot.
Which is maybe the problem that like a lot of guys are being recruited too young now. Like arguably, should you leave a Nick? I know why you sign a Nick Wayne and you put him on television. And I think Nick Wayne's great, but like, should you leave him there for another 5 years to stew before you bring him onto TV? Probably, but like, there's an arms race for young talent, so you sign him, and then when you sign him, you got to use him.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, I mean Nick Wayne. Who is Nick Wayne learning from right now? Who is he a lackey of?
You see, he's following the AJ Styles model.
And I mean when you watch Nick Wayne wrestle, it's not like he doesn't remind you of AJ Styles, right?
Yeah, the one I'm kind of a little disappointed because when I watched Dante Martin in 2000, like 2020, 2021, whenever he started breaking through, whenever he
Mhm.
had those like great couple TV matches, I saw so much young AJ and Dante Martin, and injuries haven't helped. But it's a shame that he's kind of stalled out, and it's like, oh man,
I can tell you right now my issue with both Darius and Dante Martin.
what is it? They're not on TV, so
Those guys aren't in great shape.
eh.
Like those guys aren't in great physical shape. And when you are, in your early 20s and you're a great natural athlete and you're a professional wrestler, you should be in shape. You should have abs. Like I'm not saying you have to, but I think it's a bad sign for your dedication to your craft for you to not be in like great shape. Look at who um are like you're in that company, right? And you have all these great athletic high flyers that are making it big, right? Look at what those guys did with their body. Look at Pac, right? Look at Ricochet, right? Look at Will Ospreay. Those guys took worked on their body in a certain way. And that was something that I think highlighted their dedication to their craft. And when I see the the when I see the top flight guys and they have like my physique, I think that's not a great sign for And I don't feel like they're getting any better. I said, I think that's not a great sign for their overall dedication. But they're still young. They'll learn. They could be a lot. They can still be a lot better. But that was something that I noticed. Um, not to body shame, but body shaming them pretty badly.
I had a thought there as you were running down like generational high flyers, and that like I think that did benefit AJ was that like his style was novel in 2002. You know, there wasn't a ton of people doing what he did, or even trying to do what he did. How do you think like if you were to transpose like beat for beat, if you were to pick 2002 AJ Styles up and dump him in 2025, how much do you think he'd stand out these days?
I think he would still stand out a lot because what separates him is not like that he does flips or that he wrestles at a fast pace. I think his explosiveness and like the snappiness of his movements are really what set him apart. Like in his just like especially if you ever watch some of it, these are more likely his indie dates. Watch his indie dates from like the mid 2000s and he's wrestling like smaller guys and he's like Shingo Takagi. Like he just mauls these guys. And so I still think he would stand out a lot. There's a big difference to me between like guys that can do cool moves and guys that can like rotate a lot and guys who are like explosive athletes,
Hmm.
like Pac, explosive athlete, um, Will Ospreay, explosive athlete. Like Jack Evans is a guy that can rotate a lot, but there's not a lot of explosiveness and sharpness with there. When I watch AJ, I think of like a guy who's just like a really, really coiled, explosive athlete. And I think that's honestly what make him stand out more than just a guy that, yeah, he could do the Fosbury flop and he did the spiral tap and he can do like these really cool moves. But that's only part of the equation that I think made him stand out. I still think he would really a really good standout today.
And yeah, I do think that is an interesting generational difference between like AJ's generation and this one, where like you watch a Roderick Strong or an Austin Aries from even like 2005, and you get that same thing. Like Austin Aries,
Mm-hmm.
everything Austin Aries did looked awesome, everything. And you watch like an average indie match now, and it's guys doing sequences. You know, they're doing an impression of somebody. They don't have the same fire. They don't have the same snap. They don't have the same belief in what they're doing. They're kind of just regurgitating spots they saw on TV.
Yeah. Well,
So,
there's a physicality
mm,
there where it's like these guys are wrestling still. Like AJ, like not to sound like a grumpy like
we're all grumpy
um
old man. Embrace it.
yeah, not to
Back in
sound like
my day, the
well
wrestlers hit
like
each other.
well no, because I use Jack Evans as an example, who's a contemporary of those guys, right? As a guy who was like athletically could like do a bunch of high spots and nobody like took more crazy risks and bumps than Jack Evans did. Watch some of his ROH stuff. It's insane. But he wasn't the same kind of explosive physical wrestler as a guy like AJ Styles or a guy like Roderick Strong or a guy like Austin Aries. Um, and you definitely do if you watch the indies, you see like the sequences, you don't always see the physicality. And what made AJ Styles and those other guys so great is that they had that physicality. And there are guys coming up that's I think have that. It's not like a lost art or anything. There's definitely a higher percentage of people on like an indie show or like on a wrestling show um, that can do like cool sequences than there maybe was in like 2003. But I think a lot of it does feel like it's choreographed.
Yeah, the baselines are different, right? Like the baseline these days is let's do cool spots, and the baseline those days was let's like get down and wrestle, I guess. And
Yeah,
not that
grab a
back in
hold
those
and
days,
sell.
yeah, not that back in those days there weren't guys who were just like let's do cool spots because there are some Jack Evans matches that are just like
Mhm.
that and they're cool in their own right. And not that there aren't guys these days like an Adam Priest who's like let's get down and wrestle. But I feel like the general baseline is a lot different era to era.
Yeah, and it a lot of it depends on like what people were watching. Like in the early 2000s, who were like if you were a 18-year-old wrestler making your debut in 2002, who were like the work rate cool guys that you wanted to emulate?
Let me tell you about Chris Benoit.
Yeah, right. Like Benoit is like the really, really famous one.
Yeah.
For people of that generation. But you also could say like wrestlers like Shawn Michaels or, William Regal or these other guys who wrestled a very specific style. If you look at it today, who are those guys? It's Will Ospreay or it's an AJ Styles.
It's actually kind of interesting how like the wrestlers influenced by pre-back injury Shawn Michaels were generally a lot better than the wrestlers influenced by post-back injury Shawn Michaels.
It's a good point. I mean, Shawn, like we were talking about AJ, like as Amy, like Shawn is obviously a hugely important wrestler of that style. Especially if you watch like 1989 WWF, like the Rockers and their style stands out so much compared to so much on those shows. It's like comical in a way. Um, and obviously Shawn and Brett, took main event pro wrestling in the 90s into a completely different direction in terms of in-ring quality. But we don't really need to discuss that necessarily here. But it's an interesting point in terms of like when you're talking about post back injury Shawn Michaels influence, you're talking about like the "I'm sorry, I love you" spot, right?
The general like melodrama Shawn versus like that's not who he was in 1997, that's not generally who he was as a performer. There was bits of it, but like post comeback, post 2002, he was like a very different performer. He was going for much bigger, broader, he is the father of Why Am I So Violent in all the good and bad ways, mostly bad.
Yeah. I don't know how much of it is Shawn's fault directly. How much of it is
I don't know. He's in NXT literally training these kids now.
I know, but I think it's almost a broader issue of like wrestling is about telling stories, and we got to tell a story, and the easiest way to tell a story is to talk during the match to tell everyone the story.
Some would say the laziest.
Well, yeah, easy and lazy are often the same thing. um, so AJ he leaves. Can we? I want to talk about AJ's departure from TNA.
Yes.
Which you said like the company really is never the same. A lot happens during that time period, right? We have management changes. We have television network changes. I mean, they eventually end up off of Spike TV. Not right away, but eventually does happen, and that becomes a huge issue for the company that they have never really recovered from in that way. You mentioned Sting leaving. There's other departures, but AJ leaving symbolically felt like the end of TNA as it was created. And subsequently, it has existed in a different form, both literally and in the minds of a lot of fans since then. Were you working for the company at the time?
No.
What was your reaction to AJ leaving?
I'd say shock, but understandable shock. Like, when you look at where the company was, it was post Hogan Bischoff. It was, they went on the road in 2013 and disastrously lost a lot of money. So all of a sudden, the purse strings were a lot tighter than they were, say, in 2009, pre Hogan Bischoff, when the company was generally accepted to be in one of its few actual like profitable periods. But like when the stuff was coming and his deal was due, I think I would have expected him to re-sign more than I didn't at the time. Because like there was the talk, his contract was extended past Bound for Glory to do the world title story with Bully, where he went to Wrestle One and he went to AAA to defend the title and stuff like that. I think like maybe it was cope on my part, not Adam, but maybe I was hanging on to the hope that he would stay. But like when you looked at the wrestling landscape at the time, when you saw a burgeoning New Japan, and you saw obviously WWE was always an option for him, regardless of how they felt philosophically. But that was right in the moment when that philosophical change in terms of the style WWE generally presented was changing and changing very quickly to kind of fit the kind of wrestler AJ was. Yeah, I would have been like 70% he was going to say, 30%, oh my God, he might leave. And it landed on the 30%, oh my God, he might leave. So I wasn't like, oh, I could not fathom this happening, but I was surprised and disappointed that like that moment came. Because like AJ was a home team guy. He's always been a home team guy. He's a real like, I work for this company and I'm going to bat for this company. And then they asked him to take a giant pay cut and Jeff Jarrett left. And all of a sudden, like the things that made him a home team guy, he suddenly was like, what the fuck am I a home team guy for if you're not a home team guy for me? So all of a sudden, he started looking elsewhere.
Mhm. And he was being pushed strong at the time. He was a
He was world champ
champion.
at the end.
After some years of weird booking where he was pushed strong, he did the whole Ric Flair understudy, but he also did the thing like, what was the first thing that Hogan and Bischoff did with AJ Styles when they came into the company?
Well, it wasn't the first thing, but he did drop the belt to Rob Van Dam.
Right. It's like immediately we got to get the title off of this TNA guy and put it on a real TV star and Rob Van Dam, which immediately set the tone for what this company was going to be like under those two goofballs. um And then, but he eventually, because he's AJ Styles, because he is Mr. TNA, he still holds on to a ton of esteem and fan respect. So when he becomes a world champion again, nobody really bats an eye. And he was being pushed really strong right up until his last match in the company, where right, his last match is like the Dixieland match, right? With
No, the
Magnus.
Dixieland. So he leaves, does the CM Punk Summer of Punk thing, where it's like, I'm taking the title away, because that was the idea. There was like, well, we're going to do the Summer of Punk thing properly, where he actually defends it outside of TNA, which he
Mhm.
did in Wrestle One and AAA. So in the interim, Magnus Nick Aldis is made world champion. He wins it in the Dixieland match, and then AJ comes back to champion versus champion title unification, so that Magnus officially becomes world champion, I guess, when he beats AJ in January.
And Magnus needed like a ton of help to beat AJ. Like they put him over like a god. It
Yeah,
probably didn't help Magnus's main event potential, but
Yeah, I
um,
think Magnus was injured for that one, and obviously Age's contract was up, so you couldn't push the match. So like they had to do every shenanigan on earth for that. I think there was like 13 run-ins in that match. It's insane.
yeah, it was like a weird match format. It was like King of the Mountain, but kind of not. Like you had to like you had to like put a
No, you
ladder
still
at the
think
top of
you're
the
thinking
stage.
Dixieland. Yeah, that was the Jeff Hardy match where Magnus won the fake belt,
Okay,
where it
okay,
was
yeah, yeah.
there was the belt was hung at the top of the stage, and you had to get the belt off of that.
Yeah, just I'm reminding the whole Dixie Carter on-screen character phase.
Wasn't great.
Right. So he leaves TNA, and like you said, I mean, he TNA has never effectively replaced him. It's hard to envision somebody being more synonymous with that company than AJ Styles, even though
Yeah, like
we're more than a decade removed from him being in the company.
I think the first guy who didn't take AJ's spot, because I think AJ is still the guy who's most synonymous with TNA, but it took until Josh Alexander. Like Josh Alexander was the
Mhm.
first guy who like became a synonymous face of the company in a carry the company kind of way that AJ was. And like it took, I don't know, 5 to 7 years for somebody else to step into those shoes. Like when you think of like who were the guys post AJ, there's Lashley, who's great in TNA, but he wasn't like the face of the company. There's like Eddie Edwards, same thing, even though he's like kind of the heart and soul, but he's not AJ, you know. Same with like Eli Drake, nowhere near. EC3, nowhere near. It wasn't until you got Josh, who like did the same thing AJ did, like came into tag stuff, had a great X Division run, then carried the belt for longer than anybody else. So I think Josh is like the closest you get to like a successor to AJ as like the
And
TNA guy, but even then it's
yeah,
not on AJ's level.
and he was like felt like a homegrown talent. He wasn't like a WWE talent like a Lashley was, or
Yeah.
they brought in Drew Galloway. He was world champion for a little bit. They had Johnny TV or Johnny, what was his name? Johnny Impact, of
Johnny
course.
Impact, yes. Named after every
Um,
company. He'd be Johnny TNA, I guess, if he jumped now.
yeah, I mean they can have him. But so like, he leaves and right, he goes to and this is a really, really like interesting, volatile time in the wrestling world where um WWE is really struggling. They are and then you have TNA who's kind of blown this opportunity with mismanagement that we discussed earlier over the last few years to kind of gain a foothold on WWE struggles. And so now AJ Styles gets thrown into the free agency pool and he ends up in New Japan Pro Wrestling. And New Japan was just starting to really, in my opinion, gain a foothold among Western audiences. The company had been doing a better domestically for a few years after going through some really lean periods. Okada was having his long title reign. Um, you had the Bullet Club really started to kind of take off right as Prince Devitt is leaving to go to WWE, and New Japan, in a really, really shrewd decision, goes with, we're going to keep Bullet Club around. We're not going to make like Carl Anderson the leader of the club. We're going to bring in AJ Styles, and we're going to push him really strong. We're going to have him win the world title. I think this is his first match.
Yep.
And at least in my, personal experience, that was the decision that really made me a huge New Japan fan. I had been following the promotion for probably like a year or two, watching matches here and there, like watching the big title matches, but not really paying that super close to the promotion that much. But I remember they're bringing in AJ Styles. They're gonna do. They debut him. They have him beat up Okada. He debuts the same night that I think Devitt has his last match. And then he beats up Okada, and he cuts the promo where he's like, "You were a young boy in TNA, and now you're the world champion, and I'm gonna kick your ass." And then they have that. Trying to remember, I think it was Wrestling Dontaku. Was the
It was the
event.
May show, yeah.
And that was the first New Japan show I ever watched live. I bought it on Ustream.
Hell yeah.
And it was because of AJ Styles, right? It was because of, I wanted to see that match. I wanted to see him go for the title. Of course, he wins the title, and in hindsight, it was like a really, really weirdly booked match where Yujiro Takahashi was the decisive factor when he turns on Okada and joins Bullet Club.
They were still trying with Yujiro then.
Yeah. It was
given
in
up on him yet.
hindsight. I remember like I was really stoked at the time, and I was like, "Oh, awesome! AJ Styles won the world title and he beat Okada. Like, what a cool match!" And like the people that were more like dedicated New Japan fans were like, "What the fuck was that? Why was Yujiro turning on Okada? Like, why was that the how he lost the title?" But it really signals, I think, like for me, I obviously have the personal experience where it really signaled a shift for me. But I do think AJ Styles going to New Japan did bring a lot of Western fans with them, and then set the stage for further, Western investments in New Japan, even after AJ goes to WWE. But it really starts with him making that jump, which is right at the right time where New Japan is about to, explode in popularity, and right as both WWE and TNA are kind of looking around being like, oh shit, what are we going to do now?
Yeah, because if you look like January 2014 as a moment in wrestling history, CM Punk is about to crash out of WWE.
Mm-hmm.
Bryan Danielson's about to win the WWE title. And as you said, Prince Devitt's about to leave the Bullet Club, the hottest act in wrestling, and jump to WWE. So that's like such an interesting landscape in terms of like the way wrestling has played out over the 10 years since. That might be the most influential like 3 or 4 month period in terms of like the branching paths that have happened since. And he made himself a free agent at that point. He slotted right into the Devitt spot. It's interesting. If you go back and watch like his debut and even the first match against Okada, that Japanese crowd don't really know who he is, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
interesting because like, he did wrestle in New Japan before. He wrestled as part of like the TNA talent sharing agreement. Like he did like big matches in New Japan, but that crowd isn't like, oh my god, AJ Styles is here. They were like kind of a little bit, who's this guy? So like the fact that he got that reaction when he showed up to attack Okada and they still pulled the trigger on him winning the belt off Okada, I think it's AJ. So like you have faith that AJ will get over time, and he did quite quickly. But it's one of those things where it's like, I think a lesser book would have been like, oh shit, no, he got a bad reaction, pulled it, he's not beating Okada, he's not beating Okada. Whereas I think they were very shrewd and like, he'll get over, don't worry about it. So he'll still beat Okada, and it will be very, very good for us in terms of expanding ourselves into the US market. And like AJ was only there for less than 2 years. Like he was gone by Wrestle Kingdom 2016 was his last match, wasn't it? The Nakamura match.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he played a pretty instrumental role, and then handed it off to Kenny. That like the way New Japan happened, like to time those like transitions, the transition from Devitt to Styles and the transition from Styles to Omega couldn't have worked better for them. It really, really couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, in like I said, like he sets the stage even after he leaves and the company continues to be popular. He still, I think, gets a lot of credit for planting that flag. I mean, probably really helps the Young Bucks career in terms of like making the Young Bucks a bigger deal in the United States because of what they were doing as a member of Bullet Club and what they were doing as AJ Styles as tag partners and 6-man matches and things like that. I'm looking at this Dontaku card and it's bringing back a lot of memories
Yeah,
from.
I watched it recently because we covered it for our Patreon, so I have it relatively fresh in mind.
I forgot about like the Grassi brother like stuff
There's
they were
so much of
doing at
it.
the
There's so
time.
much of it that time. It's like a year worth of stuff, and it's all terrible.
It's not like when I'm thinking like, oh yeah, 2014 New Japan. I'm thinking like a card just full of like amazing matches, and I'm like, this actually card isn't really that good. Like, it does have what I can only imagine is a totally beast Ishii Tomoyaki Hanma match. Remember like that few years where Hanma was just like an amazing mid card wrestler in New Japan before his injury.
Yeah, because like Ishii stepped up into like the upper mid card role, and then Hanma stepped up into Ishii's old lovable loser role, and
Yeah,
it really worked.
yeah, those are the days. But also, like, I was like, oh, I want to go back and watch the show. I'm like, oh, but the Grassi brother, Grassi's versus Sakuraba and Shinsuke Nakamura. That was a semi-main.
Leading to a Gracie's against Nakamura title match for the IC title, a singles on the next show. It's diabolical. It's evil.
Yeah,
Gedo should
and
be thrown in jail, and
yeah,
not
like
that not that
Inoki,
evil.
like Inoki's not in like with the company at that point too. Like, what were they doing?
I don't know. Like the Gracies were names, I guess, and like they did have success with the Sakuraba against Nakamura match, which is
Yeah,
great. The Wrestle Kingdom match. So I guess there wasn't it wasn't like a total dud using some of those shoot style guys, but those guys were such duds.
yeah, they
They were
weren't
such
wrestlers.
duds.
Like, they weren't not like professional wrestlers. They were jujitsu guys. Um, there's also Satoshi Kojima Wes Briscoe.
Mm,
NWA World Heavyweight Championship match on the show. I do actually remember that. I remember like they just brought in Wes Briscoe to do a job for some reason.
yeah, and like
Um,
Rob Conway was on all those shows as like the NWA guy.
yeah, I mean, yeah, right. And like was it Bruce Tharp was like the hype man?
Yeah, the heel manager.
I kind of liked him, but and honestly, I didn't like Conway. But yeah, they're right. There was a lot of random guys coming in. There's like who's the guy? Big Daddy Yum Yum.
Yep.
He should have got over more in Japan. Just the name being Big Daddy Yum Yum sounds like someone
Mm,
that you know worked a lot of matches for Osaka Pro. Um, so AJ in New Japan, and then AJ, of course, comes to WWE, and perhaps like obviously his run in WWE is when he became the most famous, the most worldwide known on a worldwide scale, even though he was already really successful. But he honestly he has this WWE run which goes way better than anybody could have possibly anticipated, right?
yeah, it's an interesting because like take yourself back to December 2015. There was a moment where Carl Anderson, Doc Gallows, and AJ Styles were meant to jump to TNA. They
Right, they're
had
gonna
talked
go
about
back.
creative. They were going to take like the core of the Bullet Club to TNA in like January 2016, and then they bailed on like the letter of intent or whatever they might have signed or the handshake deal they might have agreed to because AJ got the WWE offer and obviously Carl and Doc followed eventually to WWE as well.
I
That's
desperately
such
did
an
not.
interesting hypothetical though. Like
So
if they
so
do that
can
jump,
you share what the background is on that? Like, so they obviously AJ leaves TNA, goes to New Japan for a few years. What was kind of like? Why was he going to go back to TNA?
I think it was always his intent. I think it was like I think AJ was more like I need some time away from this. This is what I've been doing for 12 years of my life. I just want to get out there and do some other stuff. And I think maybe part of him probably thought like WWE just didn't want me. You know,
Mhm.
I would guess that part of him was like, if they wanted me, I'm there for the taking, and they never came. So I'm gonna go do some cool stuff in Japan, and once I get that out of my system, I'll come back. So like January 2016, TNA were meant to move to Pop, and AJ Styles is meant to be on that debut show with the Good Brothers. I think actually the Good Brothers were following after based on the way the contracts came up. But yeah, and then TNA released that weird statement where they were like, AJ Styles was he agreed in principle to come back to TNA, and he didn't. They put that out into the world
Mhm.
like a score index lovers to be like, oh, AJ let us down and he lied to us. And then AJ, as we said, went on to massive success in TNA, and TNA got canceled on Pop within 3 years. So
Yeah, I mean, I remember as a fan at the time being like, I really don't want him to go. I wanted him to stay in New Japan,
mm,
obviously, but I was like, I really just don't want to see him go back to TNA. It's a sinking ship, and we've already seen him do everything that he could possibly do in TNA. It felt like just like he'd be like taking a huge step backward. But he obviously ends up going to WWE. Famously makes his debut during the Royal Rumble in one of the most poorly shot camera moments of Kevin Dunn's illustrious career.
it's important to see Roman Reigns' reaction. You don't know what's happening. The crowd are going crazy, but you need to see Roman Reigns' face the whole time, Jesse. What
Right?
else would you
Yeah.
need to see?
He comes out and he obviously has new music, right? So no one really knows what the music is,
Mm.
and
Was meant to be James Storm's song, by the way.
yeah, and we that does not fit James Storm at all.
It doesn't. It's not a good James Storm theme, so I think it worked out better.
James Storm is a cowboy hat wearing man from Tennessee.
Mm.
Um, anyway, so yeah, so like, and then just like Roman Reigns is making like kind of like a confused face. Like his face doesn't really tell you anything. You just know that like, oh, somebody is coming out. Like, who is it? Is it like a call up for NXT? Is it like
And you do hear the really big reaction because obviously AJ Styles appeared on the screen, presumably his name
right?
appeared on the Tron.
And there was
So
like
you hear a big pop.
yeah, and there was rumors that he was going to be there. Like, it wasn't like a super big surprise, but I mean, if they just filmed it differently, I feel like it would really be like an iconic Royal Rumble moment. And you could argue that it still is, but because of the
Mhm.
camera work, it's like not something you really want to go back and revisit ever.
Yeah. I imagine there is part of AJ that was like, "Will they know me?" Which is weird to think. Like he was on national television, being watched by 1.5 to 2 million people every week
Mhm.
for years. But there was, I'd imagine part of AJ was like, "Will they know me?" And they did. Like it was a really big reaction for AJ.
Yeah, especially at the time period, like with the Royal Rumble, like there were a lot the fans traveling in, and just I think that's the perfect event to debut him. Um, and then he does go through like a brief like learning curve period where it's unclear, like because of course by that time when he came to WWE, I think there had been a lot of cynicism that had set in. Um, Obviously, like the CM Punk exit and things like that had happened, and we kind of gone through the up and downs of Bryan Danielson. But like he comes in and you're like, oh, this is going to be a guy that Vince drops the ball with,
Mm.
right? Vince is going to want to beat him. He's too small. They're not going to care that he was a star anywhere else, and it kind of starts out a little bit that way, right? Like I remember he makes the debut in the Royal Rumble, and like Jericho, because he's Chris Jericho, like really wants to work with AJ. Like it's really funny if you go back and watch that Royal Rumble. Like Jericho's like basically like telling guys to get out of the way so he can work with AJ in the Royal Rumble match, which is obviously very difficult because there's like 20 people in the ring. Um,
AJ might be the original person to get Jericho Vortex.
I mean, there's got to be more people like
There
that.
probably is
Yeah,
somebody
people
before
that
him.
preceded that. But yeah, right. Like, but like, but it probably worked in AJ's favor to have Jericho be like, I really want to work this guy, and that gets him a singles match on WrestleMania. And if you remember, like there had been like this thing, like you know, JBL was calling him the redneck rookie and just like doing his typical JBL shtick, which is obviously the voice of Vince on commentary. And I was like, maybe this isn't going to work out. Um, and then of course he has those matches with Roman Reigns, kind of after Roman wins the title, and I think that really changes his career and trajectory in WWE because he has probably Roman's best singles matches of his career. I think that the Extreme Rules match, I think uh, they had was the best match of best singles match of Roman Reigns' entire career, and it's like a Herculean performance by AJ Styles. And I do think for whatever reason that was enough to completely change Vince and the powers that be in WWE's opinion on AJ in the sense of like this guy is an amazing worker and we can trust him with anybody. And that really would define his WWE career right down to the Undertaker wants to have a match that doesn't embarrass himself at WrestleMania. And who does he pick to have that match with? AJ Styles. And it just goes to show, I think, the respect that he earned in that locker room in a place where he really was always going to struggle to gain that respect. And a lot of that is due to the WWE being so obtuse in a lot of ways, but does speak to his ability to crack through what was a very difficult circumstances with him coming to WWE, where so many other people had struggled and failed.
And I do think timing really worked out for him because, like, this is, in the height of NXT, where there is a bit of a sea change in terms of what the WWE house style is, which
Mhm.
wasn't even the case 2 years prior. Like, if he jumped straight from TNA to WWE in 2014, I think he would have had an even steeper uphill battle. But this is already a period where you have like Kevin Owens breaking through on WWE TV and people like that, and I like Claudio Castagnoli is already all over WWE TV. There's people like that, and Sami Zayn gets called up. There's people like that who are starting to push the WWE house style in a direction that really favors AJ Styles. So I think like timing worked out for him in a way that like Bryan Danielson had to really fight for. That like I think like Styles is kind of standing on Danielson's shoulders and Punk's shoulders a little bit in terms of like how they fought to
Mhm.
change that the culture of what the WWE style is, and they had to fight tooth and nail for that, and arguably Punk never got there, and Danielson it was only until the NXT era that really like moved that needle. But I think the trust part is really right. I think they realized very quickly what TNA knew because TNA put him in every role under the sun, whether he's a tag guy, X guy, undercard comedy, main event guy. Like AJ can do it all. He can do absolutely anything you ask of him. So when you have somebody like that on your roster, they're invaluable and you use them all the time. If you want to get so and so ready for a main event run, you do an upper mid card program with AJ. You think like Omos is not like well rounded enough to carry his own matches, you put him in a tag team with AJ. You're worried about Roman Reigns having like the quality of match he needs to have as a world champion. You put him in there with AJ. You need a guy to carry your brand for a few months. AJ wins the belt. Like AJ can fill any role. He will do it perfectly, professionally, and better than nearly anybody else. And they realized that very quickly. Like as you said, they brought him in as like a mid card guy. He was a mid card guy doing stuff with Chris Jericho, wrestling like the Miz, And very quickly he more forced his way into those main events and into being like a world champion pretty
Yeah,
quick in this
he's. I mean,
company.
he wrestles his matches with Roman Reigns. Then he goes right into a program with John Cena where he beats John Cena twice on pay per view.
Hmm.
Like, um, he really quickly just became a really trusted guy in WWE and really remains in that position. Um, he AJ was always one of those guys. He's like, I'm gonna like retire when I'm 40, which he's 47 now, and he's not retired. He'll be 48 in June. We have the same birthday. That's a fun fact. Me and AJ Styles have the same birthday. Um, but he is still like it seems like he's almost in like an emeritus status in
Mm.
WWE. He hasn't wrestled a lot lately, and I do wonder like we're now looking at a we're at the point in time where I think in his career he's not going to get like a major push in WWE again.
No. Transitional champion on top if they need it at best, and probably not
And
even then.
yeah, and that seems unlikely. Like, I mean, anyone could win that secondary world title that they have, I guess,
Yeah.
but it doesn't seem like he would be given a major push. I mean, he's only wrestled 2 matches since October.
He was
Uh,
injured for a while.
yes. It doesn't. I was trying to like look. I'm not a regular WWE watcher. Like, I'm trying to think. Like, I don't know if what he's gonna be doing at WrestleMania. I don't know if he's gonna be. I would imagine if he's healthy, he'd probably be on one of the shows, but doesn't seem to have like a major angle or anything headed into WrestleMania.
They teased stuff with Logan Paul in the Rumble.
Right, but it doesn't seem like Paul is doing stuff with Punk.
Who knows? Well, Punk
Yeah.
is in the three-way with Rollins and Reigns, presumably, unless they changed the plan on that. But that was the rumblings.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that coming out of the Rumble, that was it. So I don't really know. Like, obviously, like I'm like as a wrestling fan, I kind of am like I don't want anyone to be in WWE because I don't like watching that company. AJ because of the shit sandwich that he had to eat in TNA for so long. Like if
Wow.
there's one guy that's like, you know what, I'm glad they're getting a huge bag of money to work less states and like not do a whole lot. It's like AJ Styles. Like he deserves it.
And like,
Um,
if there's always the break class in case of emergency. He's like the go-to guy. Even like last year, he main evented 2 shows against Cody because he's a guy that you can trust to put in main events and world title matches, and he will deliver. I like the Backlash match more than the other one, but the Backlash match was great. It was a great match.
Yeah, from when we've seen him, I feel like he still is working at a high level. He didn't quite have enough matches for me to put him in on my FSM 50 ballot, but on my rough draft, I did have him. I really liked his match that he did with Marufuji and Noah last year too. To me, he just didn't have the volume enough to kind of justify it, but I still believe that he is, if not, he's not at his peak anymore, but he is still an extremely good pro wrestler. And I don't know what his current contract situation is, but if he were to go to AEW, now would be the time to do it. Maybe he,
I think he should be welcome there as well as like the guy who is, I think, spiritually in line with what AEW wants to be as a company.
I
You know,
can't, I would find it very hard to believe that he would not get and has not already in the past received compelling offers from Tony. And I think that there are, if he were to jump to AEW, he'd certainly make, I think, a competitive salary compared to what he's making in WWE. I'm sure he's getting paid quite well in WWE now. And he's who's a more loyal company guy than AJ Styles, right?
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, as a fan, I sit here and I'm like, all right, he's 47. We know he can still wrestle at a high level. Maybe he's not going to wrestle, 100 plus matches a year, but we know he's still there. And there are matchups in AEW that you would think would be attractive to him and certainly attractive to the people he'd wrestle. Like the Will Ospreay AJ Styles match is something. Have they ever crossed paths?
They have in Red Pro. They did a singles in Red Pro, and they did a three-way match that was Will, AJ, and Marty Squirrel. It was a very good match, and that was awesome. Yeah, but they did
Really?
stuff
I
in Red Pro.
can't. All right. I really. I probably saw these two. Like they're from 2015, and obviously Will from 2015 is a hugely different wrestler.
And that match carries a lot more weight now than it did then.
Yeah.
And even then, it carried a lot of weight. It was a really cool match then, but now they would carry a lot. Like that could main event a stadium show.
It could do anything. You could do anything you wanted with that kind of match. You could also do anything with Kenny Omega versus AJ Styles, which has also, I believe, taken place before, but nothing like what it would mean
probably
like now.
2006 PWG or something.
Oh, you know what? They were tag team partners once. That's what I'm getting on Cage Match. They tagged when they were both in Bullet Club together. AJ Styles and Kenny Omega versus Shinsuke Nakamura and Yoshihashi. On a New Year's Dash show, it looks like. But obviously those are two big matches just right off the bat. But also you could do AJ versus Okada again. You could do literally AJ against literally every single wrestler in the company, and probably interesting. Like AJ versus Satnam Singh would probably be worth a watch.
You could run back Joe, run back Christian.
Oh yeah, you could do Joe Daniels and AJ again. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, it would be fun. It would be interesting to see how they could pull that off.
No, wait a minute. Daniels' career is over.
You have to get Curry, man.
What if you bring in AJ and he wants to get revenge on Daniels? He wants to get revenge on Paige for ending Daniels' career.
Oh, AJ Hangman would be so good.
Like literally everything would be good. Like, and that's why I'm like, I'm cool with him being in WWE because he's earned it. Whatever. He wants to be in like semi-retirement, but and I obviously we've seen guys kind of jump to AEW. It doesn't always work exactly out the way you want it to. But it just seems like such a no-brainer, and I feel like there's given the fact that we've seen a lot of these wrestlers cross paths before, given that we've seen so many wrestlers cross paths before, it's hard to think of like legitimate dream matches that we haven't seen yet. But those are AJ could do so much in AEW if he wanted to make that jump. I don't know what his contract situation is like. If he's going to become a free agent. It also seems like he might be at the period of time where, TKO is looking at like, okay, this guy's making a lot of money and he's older and he's not really like a draw for us anymore. Like maybe we want to ask him to take less money. And then all of a sudden he's given up he's given Tony Khan a call. Like we saw that happen with people like Copeland, who had way less of a standing in AEW than you would think AJ Styles would.
And if you're AJ and you're purely selfish, like his time as a top guy in WWE is done. As we said, like very very best case scenario, quick transitional champion, and I think that's like a 2% chance at best. Whereas if he were to jump, he would get 3 more years as a top guy in a company. So if he's purely selfish, if he's purely like I'm not done being a top guy, I'd like to be a top guy longer and work big matches against Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega, the A jump probably makes a little more sense to him depending on when his contract is due.
Yeah, I mean, AJ versus Swerve, AJ versus MJF. Um, I'll be interested in knowing if so they're gonna do like Tanahashi's doing his big retirement at the next Tokyo Dome show um in next January, and I do wonder if AJ will be on that show.
Yeah, you would hope so. He's like a guy who has a weirdly big connection to Tana. Besides that, they both did the Styles Clash, but like Tana's TNA match against AJ, Tana did a bunch
Mhm.
of obviously IWGP title matches against AJ.
Well, I was thinking about this when I was watching the Tanahashi Goto match. And I was thinking about, okay, like what's Tanahashi's last match going to be? And I'm thinking about like the traditional big Japan retirement match is right. Like you do a multi-man tag match and you have like, it would be like Tanahashi and, three and two tag partners versus, his famous enemies, right? So, and I was thinking like the most logical match, just based on like his career, I would say I would want it would be like Tanahashi tags with Shibata and Nakamura, which again would require AEW and WWE to work with each other, which I think would entirely be up to WWE whether or not they would want to let a contracted talent work with an AEW talent. But it would be Tana, Shibata, and Nakamura versus Okada, Omega, and Styles. That
Mm.
to me would be like the logical Tanahashi match to do. But also it depends on contracts and things like WWE and AEW working together. So I wouldn't get my hopes up for that, but it does make me think that he probably will be like, will he wrestle in New Japan again? We know he wrestled Noah. Um, but will he do that again? I don't know. But he's definitely gonna he still has some tread on his tires. I just wonder how he's gonna use that before he finally does retire.
Yeah, and he's made very good money for the last 10 years. Very good money.
Well, I
So
mean,
I'd imagine if he wants to step out, or maybe he's just like roaming free agent, which I wish wrestlers did more of, if I'm honest. Like
yeah, just
especially
like
late in their career, if he's just like, I want to do a TNA match, a New Japan match, and an AEW match, and maybe pop into WWE twice a year too. I'm just gonna be a roaming free agent. Whoever wants me, pay me up, pay up. I'll do a cool match for you. I wish
yeah.
wrestlers did that more.
I mean, isn't that kind of what Brian Danielson said? Like his dream is like he's like, this is the last wrestling contract I'm ever going to sign because when I keep wrestling, I'm just going to kind of wrestle wherever I want.
Yeah, which is that seems really cool to me. It's like if you come to me with something that excites me, I'll do it. Otherwise, I'm not signing a deal. You know?
Yeah, I mean, you got to be in a very specific position to do that. Like financially, you basically have to be a really big star where you're going to be making a lot of money per date.
Mm.
Um, in order for you to do that, because it's obviously just the security of getting a full time contract outweighs that in most scenarios. I mean, I remember AJ saying, 10 years ago, like, oh, I'm going to retire when I'm 40. And then, like a lot of wrestlers, once you turn 40, you actually start making more money than you ever did before. And you're like, well, I'm obviously not going to retire now.
Yeah, I think
Um,
Cody was another I'm going to retire when I'm 40 guy, and that's coming up. Let's see will he commit to that one.
yeah, I mean, it's really hard to retire when you have all that money coming in as you get older. Do you think he'll wrestle in TNA ever again?
I really hope he does. I want to hear "Get Ready to Fly" one more time. Like I'm shamelessly wanting to hear "Get Ready to Fly" one more time. One more AJ man. It doesn't need to be a run. It just need honestly. I'd even just take an appearance. I just want to see him step into a TNA ring one more time. I think he needs to put the right. He doesn't need to. He's a fucking multimillionaire. He doesn't need to do anything.
He
I
needs
would
to do
like.
it. Yeah.
Yes, I would like him to put a nice cap on that TNA career. And like he did send the video message for Slammiversary in 2022 for the 20th anniversary, which I thought was nice. And if that's it, that's okay. It's better than nothing. But I would like one more appearance, one more AJ Styles Get Ready to Fly. Do a match against like Frankie Kazarian, who's one of his best friends and like has a long time tie to him, and everyone goes home happy. That I would like that.
I mean, there's no reason why he couldn't do it because of TNA and WWE's working agreement.
You would hope so.
I mean, they're not necessarily sending the AJ Styles level wrestlers to TNA. but there's less blocking that than ever before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think his career is different if he's like 10 years younger?
Now,
I feel like in some ways I mean, we talked about how he was an innovator, how he helped, um, how influential he was to the current generation of wrestlers. Um, Part of me still I wonders what his career would be like if he came up instead of being like the only guy who was wrestling a certain style and kind of redefining the wrestling style on major American wrestling television, if he came along later, like 10 years later, where people were a lot more accepting of his wrestling style, like would
I
his
guess
career be different?
like my question is like, what didn't he do? You know, what didn't he have the chance to do that he could have done
I
later?
The
And I
difference
don't think there's a ton.
Yeah, so the key difference to me would be like would he have even more great matches on his resume because he worked in an environment that was more conducive to that?
I still think there's a little part of like his great matches are dime a dozen now. You know, there's everyone
Yeah.
has great matches all the time, and I do think part of what helped AJ stand out head and shoulders above so many people is that he was having great matches at a time when great matches were at a premium. You know, where having a great 4-star plus match on pay-per-view truly meant something instead of like we're recording this before AEW Revolution, where I think most people watching that card expect there to be minimum 4 to 5 4-star plus matches on that show. You know, we live in a completely different world in terms of the expectation for his kind of wrestler, and I do think like him
But
having
AJ's
those kind of
so good.
matches in an
Yeah.
era that he stood like he would have those matches. He would have matches on the level of the Will Ospreay matches. And Dave would be throwing star ratings at him left, right, and center. But I do think part of what helped him stand out is that he was novel in a sea that had Triple H main events that were just headlocks and boring.
Yeah, no, it's you're definitely raising a very fair point. I guess he's so good that, and it's not like he really was shortchanged in any dramatic way, but I wish he would have been in an era where he wasn't like TNA wasn't he wasn't I wish TNA was a little bit more stable and knew exactly what they wanted to do with him the entire time he was there.
Yeah,
I
instead
guess is
of
what I'm getting at.
some years he had a great year, and other years he had one good match against Bully Ray. That match against Bully Ray is very good. Because like my thing would be like, who didn't he wrestle that you wish
Right,
he
like
could have?
it's well, Kenny Omega apparently.
Kenny is
Um,
the guy. Yeah, Kenny is like the one he missed because he even got Osprey. He presumably wrestled Pac somewhere. I'd be stunned if he didn't. Like he came up with that generation of indie guys. He had a run in Japan against all the top guys of that generation. He even went to Noah to have a little match against Marufuji, which I'm not sure did he have in New Japan. That might have been like a G1 match some year or something. I don't know. But like there's not that many on the list of guys you would be like, damn, AJ missed that guy, you know? And he hit a lot of those people in their primes.
mhm,
So I think he kind of accidentally stumbled his way through a pretty good run through the guys you would have wanted him to wrestle.
yeah. Well, I mean, even when he obviously wrestled a lot on the indies in the mid 2000s too. So he
Mm.
basically hit, even though those guys were never in TNA, he hit those guys. Like I'm looking right now, his two Pac matches were in 2006.
Yep. Would have had a bunch
Um,
of Brian Danielson matches. Even though he had Brian Danielson matches in Ring of Honor and WWE. So he hit 2 different years of Brian Danielson,
yeah, it would really just be like I guess like the AEW guys, right? Like a Hangman Page or an MJF. He might have even
which is the
wrestled
reason you would
Hangman
want the
at some.
jump. Yeah. Yeah, he would have been like Ring of Honor adjacent with Hangman. So he might have done something with him somewhere.
Yeah, like when
But
Hangman, I got nothing. Yeah, so nothing for Hangman, but yeah, I guess those would be the guys. Probably hasn't wrestled Swerve, but those guys are like almost like those are next generation guys. They're not. It's not like he missed any of his contemporaries, really.
yeah,
Like,
whereas if you look at like the guys in WWE, you would want him to wrestle now. Which has he wrestled Walter? I'm not sure. If he hasn't, he should, and then leave.
um,
Um,
he has
I'm,
never wrestled Gunther. Let's see if he's
yeah.
wrestled Walter. No, he did wrestle John Walters in a four-way match in New Jersey in 2004.
So if you're like the guys left in WWE who you want him to wrestle, you would want him to wrestle Walter, and maybe like a Braun Breaker, something like that, which he might have already wrestled too. I don't know. I don't watch WWE TV. He may have
Yeah,
already
I don't
wrestled.
honestly. If they were to wrestle in WWE, I wouldn't care. Like,
But like I think that's going to be like in 10 years down the line when Braun is probably a top guy in WWE, will be like, oh hell yeah, it's nice that AJ wrestled him. And then you just want him to jump to AEW and have all the cool matches. That's kind of what you want.
it is what I want. I don't want to see him wrestle Logan Paul. I don't want to see him wrestle Dominic Mysterio.
He wrestled Dom a couple weeks ago. I'll have you know, you've got that one. You don't have to worry about it.
No, I know. That's why I used that as an example.
I'm
That's
sure I
things I
didn't watch
don't
it.
need. That's things I don't need to see. How dare you? You call yourself an AJ Styles fan. You weren't sitting down for Dom Mysterio versus AJ Styles.
I know, and I am the number one Dom defender. I'm the known Dom defender in the universe, and I didn't
I'm.
watch the Dom AJ. I watched the Dom Chris Sabin Speed Dream match, but I didn't watch Dom and AJ.
I mean, from a. I'm just looking at that match. I have never seen a episode of WWE Speed. It would require me to log into Twitter. How was the Dom? Oh, you didn't watch the Mysterio match. I'm kind of curious if that match was any good, just because, in terms of a challenge, it's got a 6 on Cage match, which isn't particularly good for a WWE show these days.
What do you mean challenge? Dom's a pro, a great heel, tremendous worker. Disrespecting Dom. I won't have it.
On this show, we disrespect Dom Mysterio. I'll tell you right now.
I will defend Dom to my grave.
Did he ever wrestle Garrett Bischoff?
He turned on him once when he was flirting with joining Aces and Eights. He might have wrestled him. I'm not sure.
Because I'm kind of curious now. I mean, the Garrett Bischoff was involved in like some of those
He would have been in the same
multi-man matches.
Yeah. I'm not sure if they had a singles, but they would have definitely crossed paths and like a tag.
Yes, they've wrestled 3 times, all in like big multi-man tag matches, probably to hide Garrett Bischoff.
Or to hide Rampage Jackson if you want, depending on the match.
Yeah, I'm looking at like some of these. So this 10-man tag match, the team was Devon, Garrett Bischoff, Nux, Ken Anderson, and Wes Briscoe. That is a rough 5-man team.
Not great. But like people are like, why did Aces and Eights fail? It wasn't a very good group of people. It was a bad group of people. Even if the angle was the best, the matches would have been terrible. It was a bad group of people.
Well, it's a sprawling group of people. But yeah, I mean, now I'm thinking of Aces and Eights, which is not how I want to spend my Sunday afternoon.
But when you think about it, that's the AJ that became world famous. It's really weird that like that AJ opposing Aces and Eights is the AJ that everybody knows now. The weird last year of AJ that didn't really work, opposing Aces and Eights. He had to turn babyface because the heel turn wasn't clicking. That's the AJ that like the rest of the world knows. That's their AJ. It's really weird.
Did you know Garrett Bischoff wrestled a match last year?
He wrestled in TNA not too long ago. They did a little Ace and Eights reunion for the 20th anniversary.
They did? Oh my god! Now I am seeing that now.
Where they were managed by D'Lo. D'Lo ran wild. It was kind of cool.
Him and Wes Briscoe. They lost to Kenny King and Vincent. That's kind of crazy. Who was clamoring for? Who was clamoring for that Garrett Bischoff return?
I don't know. It was the 20th anniversary.
Yeah, Aces and Eights nostalgia.
Do some fun with no, the D'Lo post match. D'Lo runs wild, hits a sky high in that match. After that match, it's awesome.
You're trying to get me to watch this match, and it's not going to work, Garrett.
I'm not going to get you to watch it for Garrett Bischoff, but D'Lo Brown is cool.
Him and Wes Briscoe tagged again last year. Garrett Bischoff and Wes Briscoe as Aces and Eights. They lost to Chavo Guerrero and Epico Colon for a promotion.
Match.
For a promotion in Florida, ALW, Atomic Legacy Wrestling. This has got some people. I'm now looking at this indie show. It's got a lot of people on it. Shannon Moore is their world champion, in case you're wondering.
I didn't even know Shannon Moore was still wrestling.
Oh, he lost in the next match to someone named Jason Dugan.
No, my ink boy.
Oh, yeah, man. TNA managed to find a lot of guys who went on to do absolutely nothing else in wrestling during that time period.
Yeah, Anarchia, Crimson's still wrestling somewhere, I think. But
yeah, but like in terms of like just like they got for people that got like significant runs on television. But who was the inking guy? Jesse
Neal.
Yeah, Jesse Neal.
He was a Team 3D trainee.
Gunner and Murphy.
Well, thankfully Gunner's not gone on to do anything.
Oh yeah, well he actually did at least have like a post career.
Yeah.
There.
I'm sad Rob Terry's gone on to do nothing.
Is he in like Cirque du Soleil or something like that?
Is he? I don't know.
Oh, I'm confusing him with Mason Ryan.
Oh, good for
Who,
all your large Welsh men are the same to you,
yeah,
are they, Jesse?
well, they were both around at like the exact same time,
Both
which were like,
humongous and Welsh, so they're
yeah,
basically the same.
where they were like these both like huge Welsh bodybuilders who were both really bad.
Mm.
Um, yeah, you're right. No more Rob Terry. It's a weird time period, but AJ's still the glue, keeping everything together. I remember they did like they had the Destination X pay-per-view event, probably in like 2012 maybe, where like it was like all X division. It was almost like a retro pay-per-view, and I want to say, was Aries and AJ in the main event, or maybe it was AJ and Dan. I think it might have been AJ and Daniels wrestling
AJ
in the main
Daniels,
event.
yeah, 2011.
And I just remember being like that being like my favorite TNA show in like years, and being like, wow, like I wish the promotion was like that again. Um,
Because they
and it
brought back
just
the six-sided ring for one night then too.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was nostalgic, but it was also like it was focused on like in-ring work in a
Mm.
way that like just the company had kind of devolved um from.
Yeah, the show where Aries got his contract again. It was him, Jack Evans, Loki, and DJZ in a four-way. That match rocked. Also, the RVD Jerry Lynn match on it, which was also very good.
Yeah, they ran that back. I hated RVD's TNA run.
Yeah, it's not great.
I just thought he was really lazy the entire time.
He was checked out. Yeah, it was a payday. There's some good matches and some like, that's fun that happened, but it's not rampant with highlights. The highlight is actually when he returned and he was doing a beatdown on Sammy Callahan, and then Katie Forbes started twerking at Sammy Callahan's face. I think that's the highlight of Rob Van Dam's
Oh yeah,
TNA.
that was like what, like 2017, 2018 maybe.
Yeah, 2019, 2020, and when he got TNA banned on Twitch for for that week because of the segment in the bed with Katie Forbes. Those are fun times.
I'm looking at this Destination X pay-per-view.
Mm.
It was probably better than I remembered it. I mean, I think I remembered it being better than it really was, just looking at this card.
You didn't love Mark Haskins being Doug Williams' mystery opponent?
Yeah, did people know who Mark Haskins was at the time?
They did not.
Um, Eric Young and Shark Boy going over Generation B.
And what was their last match? I think they were done after that.
Yeah, well, when you got a chance to put over the Young Bucks or Shark Boy, was this when Eric Young had his own like fishing show?
Yeah, he had two shows during that period. He had the fishing
Yeah,
one and like a general travel show.
I think it was like Off the Hook with Eric Young.
It was on Discovery.
He would be like, when you're talking about like guys other than AJ, like who are Mr. TNA. I would say like Eric Young would be on the short list.
Yeah, there's like him. There's James Storm
Yeah,
is right up there.
Eric Young's like doesn't add to me, like isn't as big of a star as those guys, even though he would get pushed later as like a top guy. Um, but like he would be a guy who's spent majority of his career in DNA.
And
James Storm too.
he's pretty much the only guy who's really bridged the eras as well. Like
Hmm.
in terms of like the Anthem era versus pre-Anthem, EY is like one of the legacy guys that connects those, probably along with the Guns.
Yeah. All right, gonna wrap it up. I know. You gotta be kidding me. That was on hiatus. Are you guys coming back?
We should hopefully we did a Patreon show today, so hopefully we should be getting the Bound for Glory 2006 episode out in the next couple weeks.
People have been waiting for months for that Bound for Glory 2006 episode.
They have Kurt Angle debut month. Russo's back. You get Sting in the main event. You get Russo TV. It's the pacing difference is insane. The amount of notes. People don't have enough sympathy for the podcasters, Jesse. I keep saying it. When you have to cover Vince Russo television, the amount of notes you suddenly have to take goes through the roof. There's so many segments. So
Yeah,
much stuff happens.
This is when people would get mad about, like, the only people who would get mad about this were the podcast reviewers. Where like they'd be like, "There's too much stuff happening on Dynamite. Like, there's too many angles. There's too much stuff happening."
You gotta write it down. It's so much stuff. You gotta type and then pause and then look up and then you fall behind and you have to rewind. It's a whole thing. We don't get
Yeah,
enough sympathy.
I did. Well, during I can't even remember if Russo was doing it. So it was right during the end of AJ Styles' time in TNA, when like they were really pushing Magnus, and Dixie Carter was a on screen character and things like that. I was doing live like write-ups for Wrestling Inc. of TNA each week. So I was
This
watching the
this is during
show.
the secret Russo period. Yeah, early
Yes.
2014. That
Yes.
secret Russo return.
So not only was I having to pay attention to the show and write everything down, I was doing it live. So I
Oh
couldn't
no.
like pause and do anything else. So I was just like trying to type as fast as I can. And then like, every 10 minutes or so, you got to publish it. So people who, are looking at the site are watching it too. And that was a lot of work. Of course, I was definitely being paid a ton of money to do it at Wrestling Inc. So it was all worth it, right?
Mm,
So yeah, so you think so? The podcasters have my sympathy, but try doing those live notes, man.
damn. I never did. I never reviewed anything live. Oh no, I did live pay-per-views, but those are just takes. I don't need. I don't need play-by-play for those. Thankfully.
Yeah, no, this was like because you got to write down like what people are saying in promos. Like matches are fine. Like matches, you can like be like, oh, Chris Sabin had control for a few minutes and worked over Daniels' leg, and then Daniels made a comeback, hit a big dive to the outside. Like that stuff, matches are relatively easy. But when you're talking about promos, and you're talking about like Russo promos and people running in and doing it's like that. That's almost impossible. That's something we should probably have AI doing. I'd be okay with that.
Yes, recapping wrestling shows. I appreciate those for old recaps. Like in terms of finding like small, minute details, those recaps are pretty invaluable because like
I
a lot
mean,
of stuff is just like, oh, so and so beat so and so. If you're using Cage Match, you can't work out the nitty gritty details. So some of those
yeah,
recaps really
I mean
useful.
back in the day, before it wasn't before YouTube, but before kind of everything was quickly uploaded onto YouTube, um, or like there was a lot of clips where would be going around like social media. Like that was how you found out what happened on shows. Would be like, oh, if you didn't tape it and you wanted to see it, like, oh, I missed Impact last night. Let me see what happened. You would read like a recap like that. Now I would go to YouTube and I would look up like, oh, like I missed Dynamite last night. I didn't tape it. Let me see. And like, they'd upload like all of the segments and be like, oh, let me see this match, or oh, like Hangman Page promo. Let me click on that. Wasn't like that, back in during necessarily like, 10, 15 years ago, even though we had like YouTube, it just wasn't as ubiquitous. The content wasn't ubiquitously immediately available like a second
Mm,
after it happened. So if you wanted to follow something live and you weren't watching anything, that was the way to do it.
just to read the words and picture it in your mind.
Yeah. And you felt if you saw the worst was if you saw something that was really good and you'd try to be like descriptive about like why it was so good, but it's really hard because you're writing like in a live setting. I remember watching it was a really good match. It was a Ultimate X match randomly on it, and it was Trent, who was going by the name Greg Marashulo, which I believe
Mm-hmm.
is his real name.
Yep.
I'm trying to think who he was wrestling. You might know off
Um,
the top of your head, but it was
Sanjay was in it, and Manik, was that the three-way? Because I know Manik won it. Was Sanjay the third guy? I think Sanjay was the third guy.
it was a really good match, and I remember
Mm.
like trying to describe that live, and it was really difficult. Um, And then, like, I think the next week, I watched a ROH pay per view that had the Young Bucks versus Kyle O'Reilly and Bobby Fish match, which I thought was like the greatest match of all time when I watched it live.
Mm.
And then my days watching TNA quickly ended after that.
Oh no! Curse you, Ring of Honor.
Yeah, blame Ring of Honor raising the bar. I still remember the show. All right, Garrett. So you got your Patreon. You guys just recorded an episode.
Yeah, we just recorded an episode of Gift of the Pods. We do a Lucha Underground retrospective show
Mhm.
on Patreon. We're going through that 2 episodes at a time. So that's up on patreon.com/kiddingme or tnhad.com if you want a quicker URL.
And you are done with your Disney podcast,
Yeah,
correct?
we ran out of the because we were doing it. We went into like the videotapes era, the direct to video. We covered like 4 of those, and we're like, we can't keep doing this. We're
We can't
done.
do Beauty and the Beast 2, Belle's Enchanted Christmas, okay?
Oh, we did that. We did do Beauty and the Beast 2, Belle's Enchanted Christmas. I went so far as to buy, there's a Hercules straight to video one that is just like 3 unaired episodes of the Hercules cartoon. I bought that VHS and then we canceled the podcast before we covered it.
So yeah, so you had it's called Behind the Magic? Is that what it's called?
Magic by Design, yeah, where we would
Okay.
have covered up until 2021, I think is when we stopped doing it. So we covered every Disney and Pixar movie up until 2021. So if you
Did
would
you
like to
even
hear
do
my
like did you guys even do like the pseudo like non they're non-official Disney classics, but Disney like helped animate them, but they never claimed them?
No, we didn't do any of those. We just did like official Disney Animated Studios ones. Because like the stuff we would have moved into eventually was like stuff like Goof Troop. That we didn't do stuff like that either, which is like the kind of Toon Studio, the stuff that they did. We
And
just did the.
and if you didn't want to review it, an extremely goofy movie.
I probably would have. That's a good
Yeah,
movie.
like you're watching like the fucking 3 Hercules unaired cartoon episodes for it, but you're not gonna watch extremely goofy movie.
Yeah, you have to go through an order.
Yeah.
To be fair,
Well,
the Lion King 2 is far too good to be a straight to DVD movie. That's actually pretty good. That's a good movie.
was that straight to DVD?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was. You're right. I swear
And,
I saw that movie in theaters though, but I guess I didn't. What
it's
about
like
I was gonna ask, like, what about like remember they did the movie The Wild? That was like Disney helped produce that movie, and it was like really, really suspiciously like the same plot as Madagascar,
mm,
but it's not an official Disney movie because Disney didn't like produce it entirely itself.
no, so that didn't make the cut.
What about like well, so did you do the propaganda movies at least?
Yes.
Because those are officially canon.
Yeah, the ones that are officially like in the Disney animated. There's like 2 or 3 of them that are officially in the Disney
Yeah,
animated.
put some
Studios
respect on
canon.
Saludos Amigos.
Terrible movie.
I watched them all like 10 years ago. Like
Yeah.
I watched every Disney. I didn't watch them in order. I watched the ones that I hadn't seen before. Like as a kid, I watched a lot of them actually, but then I watched them all like 10 years ago. I filled in all the gaps and watched like all the ones that you don't really watch, like the World War II, trying to recruit the Latin American nations to join the Allies. Movies.
They should have made some better movies for those recruitment. Like if I watch those movies, I'm not going nowhere near America. Their movies are shit.
So you guys wouldn't watch Saludos Amigos? Wouldn't have done it when they were talking about Lake Titicaca?
No, I'm not going to war for Saludos Amigos.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, thanks a lot, Garrett. I'll make sure to have you back on the show whenever I need someone to talk about TNA again.
Yeah, I'm always here, sitting here with James Storm's facts for everybody.
Thanks.
Hello, do you like New Japan Pro Wrestling? Are you a Shin Nihon freak? If so, check out the Super J-Cast with Joel and Damon on the Voices of Wrestling podcast network.
And even if you fucking hate New Japan Pro Wrestling, listen to the Super J-Cast anyway. Not just for our great show reviews, analysis, and pastrami sandwiches, but there's also usually some dick jokes somewhere in the obligatory opening 30 minutes of absolute nonsense we chat about every single week. That's the Super J-Cast for all the best talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling, crisps, and pornography.